Enough, not quite, a bit further from the mic this thing.
Hi, good morning everyone. Could I ask you to start taking your seats now, those that haven't yet, for the event? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Andy MacDonald. I head up the low carbon transition team at Scottish Enterprise. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here today. Just to make sure you're in the right session, because there's an awful lot of things going on here during the course of today. This is the second day we've been in here running events, and again, I'm delighted to see so many people joining us here in person, as well as joining us online. I have to make a few safety announcements first for the benefit of those in the room in particular. A recommendation that you use the Test and Protect Scotland app for track and trace if you're here. Please note that unless you're exempt otherwise, face coverings are mandatory when moving around the building. There are no planned fire alarms today, and if you need to keep this badge visible at all times while you're in the premises, if you leave the Lighthouse building for any reason during the course of the day, and I know many people will be here for multiple sessions, you'll need to have some ID with you to regain access beyond the badge. So if you could keep your ID for that. Please keep mobile devices on silent throughout, although do please keep them switched on to engage through Slido for the Q&A if you wish to do so. For those of you in the room, you will see the Wi-Fi details are attached to the wall. I've got instructions just say the Wi-Fi password is on the wall in great big letters. And the access for Q&A through the Slido, the password is the password number, I should say, is 162497. So if you go into the Slido app on your phones or your mobile devices and want to ask a question, you can do so through that 162497, and I'm sure it will be announced again further through the course of the day. There will be a networking lunch available between 1 and 1:45. We'll make the announcements again around the arrangements for that later on today. And obviously there's a further session this afternoon, which many people will be staying for, so we look forward to seeing you back in here for that at the appropriate time later in the day. So the context of the Offshore Wind Day here at the Scottish Climate Ambition Zone today is very much about the offshore wind sector, but focused very much this morning on the creation of a just transition. Clearly we see the opportunity in offshore wind to build as critical part of the role to play in the transition of our energy sector, and the impact that will have in a just transition, ensuring people are involved consistently, that everybody has, and everyone and all communities have a part to play in this. It is such a huge opportunity, and for the supply chain and the developers working together in collaboration, for the ports, for all the infrastructure, and for all the resources and services that come behind that, it's hugely important. I spoke yesterday at a similar session to this on the decarbonisation of transport and the use of energy produced from our offshore wind opportunities, particularly as we scale up going forward, is hugely important as well for the decarbonisation of that sector and for the decarbonisation of heat as well. Our two remaining big areas where we need to tackle in terms of climate change and our impact on climate. So it's hugely important in so many different ways, which is why this session this morning is addressing the topic from a perspective of a just transition. This afternoon, we'll be talking a bit further about the role of floating offshore wind and the opportunity that presents. And again, there are huge opportunities linked into that for us to build on the expertise we already have, to build on the experience we have already of floating offshore wind, which is something that we have very much as an extra strength in Scotland's armoury in this space. Hugely important to what we do going forward, and hugely important for us in the collaboration of developing this industrial sector for the future. And a lot of what you'll hear today will reference that phrase as well. It's about collaboration. It's about how we all work together to deliver the different elements that we have to bring to delivering an offshore wind industry for Scotland as part of a broader renewable sector that will contribute over time to Scotland's role and Scotland's place and to Scotland's ability to decarbonise itself, but also ultimately to hopefully take some of that expertise into global and international markets. Take the skill sets that we've got, take the technology that we've got, take the expertise and experience we've got, and as will be getting discussed along the road at the SEC today, make sure that we are able to do our bit as part of the global impact of low carbon and in the industry itself. So it's about the domestic opportunity, it's about the industrial opportunity, it's about the carbon impact, and it's about international future globalisation. For us, myself and Audrey and our colleagues in the south of Scotland and the development agencies, it's about economic opportunity. That's what we're here to try and underpin. That's why this is so important to us. But it's about so many more things, and it's worth keeping that in mind as we think about the role everybody will play. And we'll discuss that through the course of the 2 sessions today. So with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague and friend Audrey McKeever, Head of Energy, Low Carbon and Net Zero. And we're just trying to work out, our titles keep moving just now for all of us. So whatever appears on the slides, that's what we're currently known as. But we're the people trying to drive this transition within our respective organisations. Scottish Enterprise has a framework, a net zero framework for action. Highlands and Islands Enterprise similarly is looking at its structure and conversion and its position as an organisation as a whole in support of economic development and our place role as well. Same with our colleagues in the south of Scotland. So I'll hand over to Audrey to host today's session and to take over for the rest of the day. Audrey, thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. Good morning to you all. And I just have to add to Andy's welcome, a very warm welcome to you all. Yeah, really quite exciting to be here today in terms of, I guess, the build-up to COP26. We've been waiting for this one for a wee bit longer than others. And as Andy says, the enterprise agencies have been working towards this point in time in terms of really looking to the future around net zero and what this means for our country. And I think we're really in a fortunate position in terms of the natural resources that we have and to build on the expertise and the legacy that we have in terms of our industrial past, but in terms of taking that forward for the future. This session is entitled Creating a Blueprint for a Just Energy Transition. And I guess we need to think about what does a just transition mean. And I think really what we really need to focus on is that it's vital that we learn lessons from the past. We need an orderly and managed transition, and we need one that creates benefits for all across Scotland. And to do that, we really do need to think about how we equip our people with the skills, the expertise, the knowledge, and really how to do that in a timely manner. We also, and very important to us in Highlands and Islands Enterprise, but across the enterprise agencies, is do it in a way that really empowers and invigorates our communities and our local economies. And I think offshore wind in particular is really exciting in terms of the potential it has to address all of those, and that's really why we are here today. I also think that we've got an opportunity here to create that blueprint that can be replicated across other sectors. And I think, again, being at the forefront of this, I think presents a really unique and exciting opportunity. We do know that there is a high degree of transferability from the oil and gas sector into offshore renewables and offshore wind in particular, not just in terms of the scale and the, I guess, the challenging conditions out at sea, but really just in terms of those soft skills as well that will be required to support the sector. So how are we going to deliver that blueprint? Well, I really hope that today's session, with the excellent lineup of speakers that we have, will get our thinking much clearer on that and get us all really progressing plans to take forward that just transition. Our session today, first of all, we will have Ros Foyer from the STUC, followed by Jim Brown from the Energy Skills Partnership, who will be looking at it from a people perspective in terms of how we address this. We'll also then have a bit of a spotlight on how collectively we're looking to support businesses in this transfer into offshore wind. That will be from Lynn in terms of the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership, and then from Shona in terms of the Fourth and Tay Cluster. We'll then have a Q&A, so if I can ask you to be thinking about your Q&A sessions, questions for that Q&A session, and we'll also use Slido to put them forward, but if you do have questions, to use the microphones that are in the room to come up with those. After that, we will then move on to Lloyd Duthie from Seaway 7, and then on to Paul Cooley from SSE Renewables. So I think across that agenda, we've got a wide spectrum of the people, the businesses, and the infrastructure, and the experience to date in terms of how we're facilitating this transition. So without further ado, if I could introduce Ros Foyer to the stage here. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, everyone. My name's Ros Foyer. I am the General Secretary of the Scottish TUC, which is Scotland's Trade Union Centre, and we represent the interests and the aspirations of almost 600,000 workers from a diverse range of industries and sectors right across Scotland's economy. And that includes many thousands of workers whose livelihoods are based in sectors like energy, construction, transport and manufacturing, all areas that are directly impacted by the transition to net zero and the need for that transition to be a just transition. And in recent years, we've seen the concept of just transition go mainstream. It's in the preamble of the Paris Agreement. Governments around the world use it to describe a range of policies. Corporate organisations launch just transition strategies, and conferences with just transition in the title are arranged, sometimes with no trade union or worker involvement. But the term just transition was born in the labour movement, and I believe it's incumbent on trade unionists like me to own and to define that term, because it's not just about transition, it's about achieving a transition that is just for the communities and the workers, or in other words, all the people who will be affected by the transition. It's about an acknowledgement that social justice and climate justice must go hand in hand, and that building sustainable lives for all citizens has to be at the heart of climate change transitioning. For some, just transition is simply about how existing institutions can manage change, reskilling and compensating workers who might lose out as industries are wound down. For others, it's a much more transformative process, requiring a shift in the balance of economic and political power. And the STUC is clear that for us, it's the latter. That's why we're campaigning for radical intervention by government, both fiscally, but also democratically. And central to that campaign is the need for increased public ownership and for re-empowering local authorities and communities to deliver change, whether that be energy efficiency in homes, our bus services, our energy system, because to us, a just green future can only be built on public investment, democratic ownership, and a strong domestic supply chain. So when it comes to how we deliver a just transition in energy, I want to begin by sounding a note of caution from past experience of industrial transitions. We've seen the decimation of mining communities and the deindustrialisation of large parts of Scotland in the 1980s, and that caused gaping wounds which many parts of Scotland have still to heal from. And I want to be honest, Scotland's track record on renewables, while impressive in terms of deployment, has led to real scepticism in parts of the trade union movement about the benefits of climate action filtering down to working class communities. A decade ago, the Scottish Government's low-carbon strategy predicted there would be 130,000 low-carbon and renewable energy jobs by 2020, with 28,000 direct jobs in offshore wind alone. Now, the latest figures show that there's less than 2,000 jobs in offshore wind and only 23,000 direct jobs in the entire low-carbon and renewable energy economy. And what's worse is these figures have fallen in the last 3 years. In 2019, Scotland's offshore wind sector exported 16.5 million in goods and services, and in that same year, it imported 51.5 million in other goods and services. So in other words, our offshore wind sector has a trade deficit of 30 million. So we really need to consider, why is this? Perhaps as a forewarning to the disjoint between government predictions and the reality of job creation in the low-carbon economy, in 2005, the then Scottish Executives Forum for Renewable Energy Development stated a number of studies have previously been undertaken, and it's clear from these that given uncertainties about the extent and nature of the various technologies involved, this is very difficult to forecast with any degree of accuracy. Some tentative conclusions emerge, however. For instance, it appears that most jobs are generated in the construction phase of development. The key point about employment impacts, though, is that much depends on the extent of domestically produced inputs. Technology sourced locally would have a considerably higher domestic employment impact than imported technology. Employment generated would also be higher to the extent that Scottish-based firms are able to export their technology. And similarly, in 2011, Audit Scotland said it's difficult to identify the number of jobs in the renewable energy sector, and projections of future employment are optimistic. To ensure sustained economic benefits, however, there needs to be a network of Scottish companies capable of supporting the renewable energy sector. In other words, a local supply chain. Now, the above statements indicate the importance of being able to build a Scottish supply chain through producing and ideally exporting our domestic content rather than importing content from overseas. Yet too often this hasn't been the case. Apart from one single demonstration turbine off the coast of Leven, all of Scotland's offshore wind installations are controlled by private corporations or overseas governments. 45% is controlled by overseas private companies, 29% by overseas governments, and 25% by UK-based multinationals. Now, there's nothing wrong with that private control per se, apart from the fact that these multinational companies appear to have a very limited interest in providing good quality jobs here in Scotland. Time after time, we see migrant workers being paid less than the minimum wage to undertake survey work on the seabed, while manufacturing work, which could have been done in communities such as Methil and Fife, and the formerly Bifab and now Harland and Wolff yards, is offshored to the Far East. To take one example, SSE and Total's 5.7 billion offshore wind farm Seagreen off the coast of Angus has been found to be paying migrant workers less than the minimum wage to undertake survey work. They've awarded the contract to manufacture the 114 jackets, the huge steel structures that these turbines sit on, to China and the United Arab Emirates, transporting them halfway around the world on diesel-burning barges, equivalent to putting tens of millions of cars on the road for a day. Because of this, fabrication yards in Fife and Lewis, which represent Scotland's best hope of building a manufacturing base out of offshore wind at the moment, and only a few years ago employed 1,400 workers, now stand at a fraction of that. The fact that the yards are still open at all is only down to the successful campaign of workers and their trade unions to ensure the 8 jackets from EDF's 54 turbine NNG project will be built here. And it's real-life events like this that make many of Scotland's energy workers and their trade unions suspicious. when business and government talk to us about a just transition, at the same time as we see a race to the bottom on terms and conditions and a failure to create real jobs. So what does the trade union movement want to see to address this? Well, firstly, we want to see regulation. We need to ensure that the shift to a low-carbon economy actually promotes fair work and good quality jobs. The Scottish Government and Crown Estate Scotland need to ensure that leases are only granted on the condition that developers support jobs in local supply chains, not offshoring those jobs halfway around the world, as they too often do now. Similarly, at UK level, the Contract for Difference funding scheme needs to be reformed to ensure that subsidies are not simply given to developers, regardless of whether they support local supply chains. Secondly, we want to see ownership addressed. Experience from countries around the world show that publicly owned energy systems are not only possible, but are actually preferable to the UK and Scotland's highly financialised model of private sector dominance. At UK level, we'd like to see the grid being taken back into public hands, and in Scotland, we'd like to see a publicly owned energy company that invests upstream in renewable energy generation. Thirdly, we need to see more trade union recognition and collective bargaining. Workers need to be perceived as an asset to invest in, not a cost to reduce. Trade unions need to be seen as genuine partners and not a foe to fight or a nuisance to avoid. That means fully recognising trade unions, with workers negotiating terms and conditions of employment at company and at sector level. And unfortunately, at present, unionisation levels in renewables are low. The renewables industry has poorer working conditions than the non-renewable energy industry, and the rate of accidents in the offshore wind sector is twice as high as offshore oil and gas. There's 30,000 direct workers in offshore oil and gas, many of whom would consider transitioning to renewables, alongside a further 17,000 jobs in manufacturing that are at risk if Scotland doesn't take steps to decarbonise our manufacturing. However, a lack of trade union recognition at sector level creates barriers to workers transitioning. To give one example, deep-sea divers in the North Sea oil and gas industry who want to transition to offshore wind have had to pay £1,700 out of their own pocket for a basic offshore wind health and safety certificate. These highly qualified workers whose health and safety skills, expertise and qualifications from oil and gas should be transferable to offshore wind. Added to this are concerns about further missed opportunities and lagging investment in other key areas of energy transition. Earlier this month, we saw Scotland miss out on carbon capture and storage funding after the UK government failed to financially support the Acorn project in the North East. It's therefore incumbent on the UK government to invest in carbon capture and storage, which will be particularly needed for parts of industry that are hard to decarbonise. The reality is that we will need hydrogen for certain things, alongside huge electrification of transport and energy. It isn't simply a case of this technology or that technology. We need to put our eggs in more than one basket. So it's a case of adopting the different technologies in different times, in different workplaces, industries and communities, and developing a wide range of solutions that work. Now, I know I've been quite negative so far, but the good news, I think, is that trade unionists, particularly those from the most affected industries, are highly motivated and committed to engaging with industry and with government on this agenda, to working with all parties across Scotland on learning the lessons from the past and seeing how we can find a way forward together. For example, we were a founding partner and continue to play a key role in Scotland's Just Transition Commission. We're highly engaged in the Energy Transition Leadership Group, which has been established by Scottish Government, and we bring our perspective and we engage in detailed dialogue across the energy sector. We work closely with industry bodies like UK Oil and Gas. We've engaged positively with the industry in developing new sector-wide bargaining arrangements, and we've been at the forefront of developing new initiatives like the Skills Passport system to start to make it easier for oil and gas workers to transition. There's a long way to go, and we won't always agree on everything, but it's both our duty and in all of our interests for the public sector, for business and for trade unions to work together to develop a way forward towards net zero that's sustainable and fair. So there's reason for optimism, and I believe there's a shared goal of creating high quality green jobs for Scotland's highly skilled workers going forward. And I hope we can learn the lessons from the past and build on them as we look towards new opportunities which are coming for offshore wind and renewables development. But in all of the discussions around next steps, when it comes to the people affected, both in the workplace and in the local communities, I would ask that you remember this simple principle: nothing about us without us. There can be no just transition if it's not inclusive, if the voices of those most affected are not heard, and if workers are not at the heart of this process. That's crucial if Scotland is to be a blueprint for a just transition in offshore wind and wider renewables. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ros. I think that scepticism and suspiciousness is real, and I think that's definitely in terms of that forward look. We need to very much address that and recognise that. But I very much welcome how you ended there around the solution focus and the fact that very much working collaboratively, and I think that will be the theme to have that common shared goal. So really do thank you for that real honest account there, so thank you. If I could invite Jim Brown now, who's Director of the Energy Skills Partnership, but also be known to many of you in the room and also online in terms of his work around with the colleges, but also very much with the industry through the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Audrey. Just adjust these a little bit. Ros, apologies, I'm ever the optimist, so I'll try to bring a bit of more positivity to this. And I think it is warranted in Scotland. I think we are actually in a very good place with regards to the just transition, with regards to skills, and that's from the top down. I think we've got a really good position, as I say. So I'm Jim Brown. I'm here as the Director of ESP. As Audrey says, I'm also the skills lead for the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council. So I'll touch on my role as ESP, the role of SOEC. Also working in Scotland, we have the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan, which is a really key document for everything in the skills landscape, and is really trying to pull everything together, so I'll touch on that as well. And I'll see if I can sync all of this together. So ESP, I heard the conversation earlier actually about organisations, companies need to realign their visions and missions, etc., with the just transition and the whole move to net zero. So we have done just that. So if the tag into that, so emerging technologies, climate emergency, and just transition to net zero. So we work across everything: energy, engineering, construction, and we also look at inspiring the future workforce through the whole STEM strategy, and we work very closely with government, colleges and industry, as the little graphic shows there. So I think that's really key, and we are very strong position here. Government are heavily involved in this, and the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council is really key to that. I mean, we've got Brian McFarlane here, who co-chairs this with Ivan McKee. So ministerial involvement and commitment to this is really, really strong, and the work of SOEC is really positive for me. So I'll move on to say a little bit more about SOEC. And SOEC itself it's one of the best structured, best governance arrangements I've actually come across in this space. It has 5 leads, or 5 key priorities. It is barriers, it is innovation, it is skills, it is supply chain. And Brian, what's the 5th one? and the 5 leads all work together and draw on one another, and it's fantastic how that works. And we have government, we've got ministerial involvement, we've got Crown Estate Scotland round the table, and we'll have the enterprise agencies. We have Highlands and Islands Enterprise, we have Scottish Enterprise. So it's really powerful how we can all come together on this. And we've not been amiss either. We've been busy, and SOEC's got a new vision and mission here. So a world-class offshore sector that underpins the transition to net zero by 2045 and maximises the value to Scotland. You'll be pleased to hear that one, Ros. Absolutely. And the missions really, as you can see there, is to grow the sector, ensuring Scottish offshore industry is more sustainable, competitive, commercially attractive. So really ambitious outlook and view for the group. And these have just been revised and refreshed. And the goals is delivering 11 gigawatts of wind, but also floating. Scotland's got a real opportunity in the floating wind sector here. We're leaders in this space, so we can absolutely maximise on this. So it's great that that's been recognised. The whole supply chain piece, the economic value, the skills, the inclusive skills is really key in this as well. So I lead on the skills piece on this. And just to be a champion, provide leadership, direction, commitment to everybody in this space. I think it's really, really powerful. And the other thing that touch on here is that it's not just the Scottish Offshore Wind Industry Council. We are tied in with the UK piece, with the offshore wind sector deal, with investment and talent, with the diversity and inclusion agenda, with the plans and the projections for the workforce, so that we can get the right skills, the right curriculum in place, in the right places, at the right time. And I'll hopefully come on to a couple of case studies at the end, if I've got time, and Lindsay doesn't kick me off the podium, just to give an example how that does work. So we do have the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan, as I said, and a number of key things that have driven this. So the net zero target, the green recovery post-COVID, the just transition, and green jobs and skills. So obviously my priorities around the green jobs and skills. All of these are interlinked, so there's nothing really that's in isolation there. And Ros, hopefully you'll like to see some of these. So there are categories of green jobs that have been identified. So there's the new and emerging, so hydrogen, fuel cell, technicians, urban miners. So there's lots of new jobs that aren't actually there at the moment that we need to be mindful of, and we need to start to think about the curriculum, actually raising awareness of these opportunities, future opportunities, and develop a pipeline of individuals who are inspired to look at these industries, have the skills that can actually give them a leg up and a foot in the door to get into these industries. Enhancing existing skills for employees as well. So we're not just talking about new industries. There's lots of existing jobs will become green. You have plumbers, electricians who will need to look at the micro-renewable space. The whole energy efficiency agenda, Energy Efficient Scotland, is driving everything down that road. So we need to support companies and individuals in companies to make sure that we can support them through this transition. So absolutely the just transition and in this space. And existing in greater numbers. One of the areas where we're involved in is the air source, ground source heat pumps. Now, even if we train every plumber, upscale them, there won't be enough to meet Scottish Government's ambitions for ground source, air source heat pumps. So we need to become more agile and more flexible in how we take this through. So we are all trying to work together in this, and this has been recognised, and the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan gives us a mechanism to take this forward. And it's identified 5 sectors for growth, and 4 of those are in our remit. So we're absolutely passionate about this. So there's the energy transition. As I say, we're working with the Energy Skills Alliance, looking at that transition from oil and gas across, construction and energy efficiency. Great work with government and industry in that space. Transport, again, great work with government, Transport Scotland and industry in that space. Manufacturing, key, working with all the partners. We've got the National Manufacturing Institute for Scotland, we've got the College Network with their Advanced Manufacturing Training Network, all working together to try and drive this. And the one that isn't in our gift is equally important as the agriculture and the land use and management. So hopefully this is kind of starting to resonate with you, and you can see this is coming together quite strongly. Understanding green jobs and skills is key. Ros touched on about the number of projected jobs when we go back 10, 15 years. I was in that space and I was always quite cautious in the numbers that were being projected at that time. They are starting to materialise now, so we need to really expand things and position Scotland in that space. We need to be able to give confidence to developers, to OEMs, to the supply chain, that there are opportunities there to help them develop their skill sets. And we've got the Green Job Skills Workforce Academy that's been developed, really to allow individuals and companies to gain access to and demystify and simplify all the bureaucracy, all the projects, all the initiatives, all the funding pots that are out there. So we need to make that simple for industry and for individuals. So this is an ambition that we have here. And the next step is inspiring and empowering young people. Absolutely. We have the Scottish STEM strategy. We are working with that. We've got the regional STEM partnerships around Scotland who are taking that forward, developed robust action plans, really, really positive. Supporting transitioning and upskilling, key to everything. Securing the talent pipeline for the future. So we need to get these things in place. Colleges, universities, private providers need to have the appropriate programs in place to support individuals. And a lot of that will be transitioning. But again, touching on one of Rose's point, recognising what skills people already have. We don't have to make sure that they re-establish or reprove the fact that they have competencies. So and there is positive work going on there with the Energy Skills Alliance, so really good. And driving change in the skills system to make it more responsive, more reactive, more agile. I'll focus on the college response here. So a couple of case studies, and Lindsay, I've got 3 or 4 here, so you can kick me off when it's time. So as ESP, we have a strategy group, which is the leaders of the Scotland's colleges, and we have the Scottish Funding Council and SDS who sit around the table and really drive our strategy. We have a number of leads forums, so we've got engineering, we've got construction, we've got STEM, so that's the practitioners who actually develop the solutions and the action plans around all of this. And then we put that into practice through training networks, and you might not be able to read some of these, but we have a wind training network. That's a great model. It started out for 3 colleges, that then expanded to 7, supported by government. There's now 8, ranging from Shetland down to Dumfries and Galloway and borders, and all around the developments and intelligence that's come from industry engagement. So industry have engaged, really positive. Hydrogen, the advanced manufacture, the marine and maritime, and transmission distribution. We've got a number of others, but ones in blue are the ones that I think are more relevant to this sector. So it's not just about O&M, it is about the manufacturer, it is about supporting the indigenous companies and the inward investors, because it will all create jobs. And the wind training network's really the one I wanted to focus on. So it's been running for about 10 years now. There's about 70 individuals go through that, or we were 70 for the first few years. That is now absolutely ramping up with offshore wind developers coming through. 90% of people who were on that programme got jobs in the industry. So we managed the numbers around the industry demand. They were supported by government to get their health and safety tickets. We got them work placements, which got them into industry. Fantastic model. So we're further developed the capability, capacity, as I say. You can see the map there. So we've got Shetland are the last ones on. Again, speaking to developers, we've got them on there. And supporting government priorities. We've already said that we've got the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council. We've got the UK Investment Talent Group and the Energy Skills Alliance. All of these are working together. I'm sitting on them all. I'm beating the drum, saying we need to push on. But really, SOEC is driving a lot of this for Scotland, and we really need to recognise that role, and we really need to recognise SOEC in all of this. So I wouldn't say too much more, but we have got the hydrogen training network. Again, industry and technology partners coming together, government and agencies all coming together. The hydrogen accelerators in that space working with us. It's at University of St Andrews. We've got the industry, the Scottish Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association, EMEX, got a lot going on up there, I think, Audrey. So all these partners are really shaping what we're doing, and we've got the latest ones, the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park, which is focused on the low carbon transport for the future. So there's lots going on in this space. As I say, we've got lots and lots of different aspects going on. From our perspective, we're developing the capability, the capacity, the curriculum across the college network, but we're not working in isolation. We're working with universities as well to make sure that that piece all comes together. We're engaging with government, we're engaging with industry, we're trying to influence government, industry and colleges to get the curriculum in the right place. But we cannot do this in isolation. I've got a team of 9, so there's not a lot of us to do this. We can only do this in collaboration and in partnership. And I think that's where we're really, really positioned strongly in Scotland to do just that. Hopefully my presentation's kind of given you a feel of that. I think we're in a really good place. I agree with Ros, we need to absolutely maximise this now and secure all these jobs and support the companies and support the individuals. But I do think there's an absolute appetite from developers, from OEMs and the supply chain. So I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jim. I think you'll all agree there is a huge amount going on, and I think also there's the appetite, as you say, from the colleges and from the developers and from the businesses. And I think what we'll see, I would expect, coming given the focus just now, is that demand is only going to rise from the individuals we hope to be attracted into this sector and to be part of it. So, before we have our Q&A session, and I'm just putting a wee reminder out there so that you can start thinking about your questions, we're going to have a couple of spotlight sessions just to illustrate the type of support and activity that is currently available. First of all, we're going to introduce Lynn McIntosh-Grieve from the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership. And Lynn is the Programme Manager there, focusing on the business transformation programmes, supporting companies to increase their competitiveness in the offshore wind sector. So if I can invite Lynn, thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey, and I'm delighted to be here this morning and to be sharing in the conversation about a just transition and a blueprint for Scotland. As Audrey said, my name is Lynn McIntosh-Grieve and I'm a Programme Manager for the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership. The Offshore Wind Growth Partnership is an organisation that was set up in support of the delivery of the offshore wind sector deal. As an organisation, we are funded privately by the Offshore Wind Industry Council, and the Offshore Wind Industry Council is made up of developers and OEMs who work off the shores of the UK and UK offshore wind projects. It's also delivered by ORE Catapult, and I believe there will be speakers from ORE Catapult supporting this afternoon's session too. The aim of the OWGP is really to strengthen the supply chain in the UK for offshore wind. It's a long-term business transformation programme running over the next 10 years up to 2030 and providing £100 million worth of investment in supply chain activity. That is to enable, to grow the capability of UK supply chain companies, to increase the capacity of those organisations, increase productivity as well as efficiency. And we deliver that in 2 different ways as part of our activities. We provide grant funding to companies to develop new products and service offerings and to build capacity for the sector. But we also provide business transformation programmes. And those programmes are about providing companies with insight, with business support tools and mechanisms in order to help them be more competitive and more effective, such that we can address some of the challenges that were highlighted earlier by Ros and also by Jim. In delivery of the grant funding and business transformation activities, we cover off 4 different particular areas. We provide, in the grant funding side of things, development grants, which provide companies grant funding of £100,000 to £1 million of funding in order that they can put that towards large-scale transformative projects for offshore wind. We also provide thematic innovation grants, which are used to influence and produce new products and services into the sector with innovative means. On the business transformation side of things, we have 2 operating programmes currently. We have the WEST programme, which stands for Wind Expert Support Toolkit, and that is really about providing companies with market intelligence, insight, understanding, and also an opportunity to understand how they can market themselves and be part of the offshore wind sector if they aren't already engaged in the sector. We work with companies large and small, from one-man bands right the way up to large organisations and everything in between, from sectors that include oil and gas, marine, aerospace, and many others, as well as people who are already engaged in the offshore wind sector. It will take all sorts in order to drive and to grow the offshore wind sector, and we recognise that we have to play a part in that. We also provide the Sharing and Growth programme, which actually we're learning lessons from the aerospace sector with the Sharing and Growth programme, and that's about providing intense support to businesses already engaged in the sector in order that they can be more productive, more effective, and compete globally and nationally in offshore wind. As you can see from the map there, we've covered, actually, it says 91 projects and activities, but just in the last week since we've submitted these slides, we've grown to 97 project activities across the UK. In Scotland alone, we have 41% of our activity focused in Scotland, and around 65% of the companies that we engage in are hailing from an oil and gas background. We are doing everything that we possibly can to engage with companies cross-sectorally who have skills, experiences, training and understanding of what is required in highly demanding engineering environments. But we don't do this alone, and actually it was an important point that Jim just made a moment ago. We are not alone in our endeavours here. We work nationally and regionally with the likes of Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprises to get the message out there to companies. We work with regional trade organisations as well as local enterprise partnerships. We also and critically engage with the cluster organisations who represent the offshore wind industry across the UK. Obviously that includes Forth and Tay and Deep Wind. So there's a lot of really positive things going on here. We are engaging right the way across the UK, but we are doing a lot in Scotland and we will continue to do so. In terms of impact, we talked a little bit about impact earlier on. I think, Ros, you talked a little bit about that and about ensuring that we have economic impact. And our focus as OWGP is in growing companies in turnover, in jobs, in exports and in KPIs, and those things all align with the overall objectives of the offshore wind sector deal. So just a couple of examples of areas where we've worked with companies who are doing really fantastic things. We have an example here of an organisation who developed an artificial intelligence system in order to enhance accessibility and safety for offshore operatives. Some really remarkable companies we're working with in the digital space, in the manufacturing space, and many others. Here is another example of an organisation we worked with on the WEST programme. This particular company from Aberdeenshire had never worked in the offshore wind industry. We provided them with knowledge, understanding, insight, market intelligence, and how to market themselves to the sector. They already were doing fantastic work in other sectors in a marine environment, but hadn't done so before in offshore wind. Based on some of the information we provided, they've gone on to won first contracts in offshore wind just this year, which is really fantastic, and these are only a few examples. But we will not rest here. We have a lot of work to do between now and 2030 to ensure that we reach as many companies as we possibly can, to engage right the way across Scotland and the full United Kingdom, to grow the supply chain in offshore wind, to increase jobs, turnover, export opportunities and intellectual property across the sector, collaboratively, inclusively and diversely. I'll just leave that one up there just to allow you to read it for a moment. Again, another company doing fantastic things in this space, supported by our programmes and continuing to do great work. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Lynn. That's really, really insightful and really encouraging seeing those examples of companies that are now, as a result of your support, active in the offshore wind sector. If I could now invite Shona Clive, from the Cluster Manager from Forth and Tay. And as you make your way up, Shona, probably just a wee plug for you, Lynn, you did mention the other cluster, the deep wind cluster as well. I guess selfishly, if I could say from my own perspective within HAI, there's many things that makes me proud working for HAI, but the deep wind cluster is definitely high up there on the list. But I think the whole cluster approach is really something that we recognise within enterprise agencies as really, really critical to facilitating the transition that we're all looking for. So thank you. That was a bit selfish of me there, but shameless plug. But if I can invite Shona up now, thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to move that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Scottish Enterprise for inviting us here today, especially to Lindsay for her patience with me. I'm Shona Clive, Project Lead for the Forth and Tay Offshore Cluster. I'm also Project Lead for the Rail Cluster project, so I've got a bit of experience in running clusters, and I'm still learning. It's an ongoing learning thing. My previous role was Head of Marketing and Communications at Babcock in the rail and power businesses, so that's where my background is. And I've recently been appointed as Vice Chair of Women in Rail UK, having been Women in Rail Scotland Chair for 3 years. Diversity and inclusion is a really important area for me. I'm very focused on it, and I'm very pleased to be part of a D&I group in renewables and offshore wind led by Isla Robb and Shan Wilson. I don't know if they're here today. I'm not sure if they are. The Forth and Tay Offshore Cluster was established in 2018 and is supported by developers and public organisations including Angus, Dundee, East Lothian, Fife and Scottish Borders Councils, as well as Scottish Enterprise and Forth Ports. It was set up to help drive the growth of offshore energy on the east coast of Scotland. Scottish Engineering, who I work for, was delighted to be awarded the contract at the end of August this year and to act as project lead for the project. So we're about 3 months in now and learning lots. Just as a small aside about clusters, I thought this is a really good quote. Lord David Sainsbury, Chancellor of the University of Cambridge, said of clusters in a McKinsey report, "Much has been said about the importance of clusters, complex, economically significant ecosystems in which people can meet, exchange ideas, develop innovations, and create businesses together. Clusters are regarded as exciting, vibrant, places where something in the air draws world-class talent and delivers fresh products and innovations to the marketplace." I like that description and agree entirely. So these are my observations since we first started the project, so bear in mind it's only 3 months. Observation number 1. Why Scotland? And obviously this is really obvious to all of you. It's a new sector to me. So wind power is the fastest growing renewable energy technology in Scotland, with potential for further expansion, especially in offshore, given the high winds in Scotland. Scotland is a leading location for offshore wind innovation, hosting the world's first floating wind farm, as well as the world's largest floating wind farm, which is now under construction. My second observation, why Forth and Tay? Forth and Tay is ideally placed to serve the next generation of offshore wind farms in the North Sea and beyond. It's got 5 of the UK's leading offshore developers based in central Scotland. It's got key elements of the supply chain with expertise in offshore wind and large complex offshore engineering projects. It's got the knowledge base, education, training and consultancy. It's got the infrastructure, diverse range of ports suitable for manufacturing, construction and/or operations and maintenance. It's got more than 3.1 gigawatts of projects in development, and it's got close links with developers, suppliers, enterprise agencies and local authorities. Observation number 3, there are only 7, don't worry. Projects in Forth and Tay. The Forth and Tay is home to a number of offshore wind projects. Seagreen Wind Energy is an offshore wind farm development wholly owned by SSE Renewables. Once complete, the project will inherit Beatrice Offshore Wind Farms, developed and operated by SSE Renewables, and the title of Scotland's largest offshore wind farm. Situated over 27 kilometres from the Angus coastline, at its closest point, the project will be capable of powering up to 1 million homes each year with low-carbon renewable energy. EDF's NNG offshore wind farm will be located 15.5 kilometres off the Fife coast and covers an area of 105 kilometres squared. The Inchcape wind farm is located in the North Sea, around 15 kilometres off the Angus coastline. That project will power over 500,000 homes. SSE Renewables has set out proposals for an amalgamation of earlier Berwick Bank and Marbank proposals. The 4.1 gigawatt Berwick Bank super project, I believe it's called, will see 307 of the world's tallest and most powerful turbines built in the Firth of Forth and located around 40 kilometres off Fife and East Lothian coastlines. This will generate enough green energy to power more than 5 million homes, double the number of households in Scotland. Observation number 4, infrastructure. The Forth and Tay has the largest amount of square feet development capacity across Scotland and a range of ports and quayside infrastructure suitable for offshore wind manufacturing, construction, O&M as well as oil and gas decommissioning. With Montrose, Dundee, Methil, Burntisland, Rosyth, Leith and Eyemouth ports in the geography. Observation number 5, I'm getting there. Innovation. The east coast of Scotland is home to a number of world-class universities and innovation centres, ideally placed to unlock many of the challenges for future offshore wind. The Centre for, I won't list them all, but the Centre for Innovation and Engineering Storage at the University of St Andrews, Concrete Technology Unit at the University of Dundee, Abertay University, the Institute of Geoenergy Engineering at Heriot-Watt University, to name a few. In addition, the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult and the University of Strathclyde are less than an hour's journey from Edinburgh, with OREC's 7 megawatt demonstration turbine located at Energy Park, Fife. Observation number 6, skills, which has already been covered in quite a lot of detail. Forth and Tay already supports a diverse offshore engineering workforce, with increased training provision being put in place to support the ongoing growth of offshore wind. Further education, higher education and vocational opportunities are all the focus of FTO and its partners, working with bodies such as the Energy Skills Partnership. There are around 13,000 students studying courses related to renewable energy at Scotland's universities and colleges, according to a report from Scottish Renewables. And finally, local SMEs. Much of the high-value engineering supply chain is imported from overseas, from Europe and the Far East, and the key challenge is to support businesses, particularly SMEs, in bringing as much of that content as possible, along with high-skilled jobs, to Scotland, in line with government targets for local UK content. So finally, why the Forth and Tay offshore cluster? Well, we're looking to build upon the area's well-established strengths by developing its supply chain and workforce in support of the commitments of the offshore wind sector deal. Our vision for 2030 is for the region to become a home of a thriving, comprehensive, internationally competitive offshore energy supply chain, serving local, national and international projects. Our mission is to accelerate and further the growth of the energy sector on the east coast of Scotland through a series of activities designed to support innovation, collaboration, investment in skills and market awareness with our member organisations. We collaborate closely with our sister cluster, Deep Wind, and we also work with industry bodies. If you're interested in finding out more, see our website, offshore.co.uk, and even better, join as a member and find out what we're all about. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Shona. That was really, really good overview, and yeah, definitely a call to action there to visit the site and to get in touch. Could I now invite Roz and Jim onto the stage with me, and we'll hopefully be able to have, over the next 10 minutes, a good range of questions coming through. So if you invite So, I think that's been a really good start to the session today. I hope you'll all agree. I am really now over to the floor if there's any questions. And indeed, sorry, I'm very conscious that as well that hopefully there'll be some questions coming through Slido as well. So you've all got that's the details up on the screen there in terms of the Slido app. Sorry, I'm assuming, that's terrible to assume, isn't it, that people are familiar with using Slido. It's just become part of the usual conference norm over the last 18 months. So for those of you, just if you're able to download the app and use that hashtag 162497 to input any questions. So any questions from the floor? And if not, I will certainly sort of start. I'll take use my position to start if there's none coming at the moment. And I'm struggling to see with the lights, but
I've got a couple from Slido, Audrey, if you want to kick off.
Okay, thank you, Simon.
First one for Roz. Where do you see the biggest opportunity for a labour market in offshore wind deployment, and what is your role in achieving success? And one of the other ones is, what are the most important lessons to learn from past strategies, targets and initiatives for offshore wind to ensure that we achieve a just transition in the future?
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. The STUC actually did a piece of research that showed that there are up to 350,000 green jobs that can be created across Scotland. That wasn't just in energy, it was also in transport and construction, a range of other areas. But in energy in particular, we're obviously excited about the next generation that offshore wind offers, and we also see that our natural assets here in Scotland and the skills of our workforce in offshore oil and gas could be put to great use in some of the carbon capture and storage projects. And I think that it is about us looking at a range of different opportunities and making sure that we continue to keep that skilled workforce engaged and that they don't end up going elsewhere, which, a lot of oil and gas workers do see themselves as part of a worldwide market. So we want to keep those skills here in Scotland. We want to develop them further. Most of that workforce is 90% of the way there, and there's a lot of discussion going on to make sure that can happen. And just to really reiterate that as far as we're concerned, our contribution to that is about lobbying and questioning government about, the role of the public sector in this jigsaw and the amount of investment and support that can be given. It's also about pushing that fair work agenda, because we strongly believe that it's not just about any jobs, it's about creating high quality, good jobs where workers have a voice. And that in itself, giving workers and your whole workforce a voice, is very important to future innovation and productivity and the ability to be agile within the economy. So we are lobbying at a range of different levels with sector bodies, with government, and directly working with employers and potential investors to make sure workers get a seat at the table.
Thanks very much, Ros.
And on that as well, I mean, from my perspective, historically there's been a problem with engaging with developers and OEMs at an early stage. I think that has improved now with the offshore wind sector deal and SOEC, where we've actually now got the direct into the developers in particular. The OEMs are still a challenge, particularly when we're looking at kind of getting a pipeline of technicians into the industry and to getting apprentices on the go. And funding is actually one of the perceived barriers I feel, because we have the apprenticeship levy down south. Well, it's actually across the UK, but down south it's very obvious and transparent, and it's not as obvious and transparent in Scotland. But there is financial support available to companies, but they don't see that, so they can't count it. So we're in a position at the moment where most of the apprentices in the UK are actually Scottish apprentices, but the majority of them are actually going down to England to be trained so that companies can draw on the apprenticeship levy. And there just seems to be something fundamentally wrong about that. Well, there is, just doesn't seem to be. There is something fundamentally wrong about that. So we are looking to see how we can work with developers, OEMs, etc., to inform them of how we have got a unique system in Scotland, but it is actually very positive, and how can we kind of turn that around and maximise that. We've got youngsters going down to England, at Grimsby and Hull for a year, being put up in hotels, and through COVID, etc. It's not been easy for them, so we need to really turn that one around. But that goes for kind of the pipeline of people and the career changers as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think, Steve, do I see your hand up? Do you want to come to the mic, Steve?
Thanks, Audrey. Jim, a question for you. Part of the transition is about the whole supply chain transitioning, not just the personnel. And one of the big transitions is the move from bespoke manufacturing to serial production. And I guess that covers all of the sites in Scotland that traditionally did that. Part of that process of becoming competitive, which you need to win the contracts, is having the people fully skilled. And while some of that can be done in colleges and training establishments, much is to be done in the production line environment. There seems to be a shortage of funding to the companies paying the wages, and that non-productive time while you go through that upskilling on the shop floor is a cost that potentially makes you uncompetitive. If you're uncompetitive in those early years, you're not going to win in an auction-based system which only facilitates the lowest price winning. So what fundings can be made available to help companies make that transition, other than the funding that goes to the colleges and training establishments?
Okay, there's a couple of things there actually. The whole kind of change in manufacturing process. We had Lynn talking earlier about the growth partnership. We've got the innovation centres who can help with that. We've got Scottish Manufacturing Advisory Service. There's lots of support from kind of how companies operate. From the skills perspective, I absolutely agree. This is one of my bugbears, and there's lots of funding there, but it's targeted at specific activities. But one of my big challenges is we need to support the existing companies and the existing workforce to transition, and we need to support that. One of the opportunities is the National Transition Training Fund, which is predominantly for those who've been made redundant or in danger of being made redundant. And I absolutely get that, and I absolutely support that. But we need to safeguard future jobs, so we need to invest in that. So that fund, or that type of fund, could be used to support these measures that you're exactly talking about. That is being discussed as part of the Climate Emergency Skills Action Plan, and how we can support these existing jobs, whether that be the company or the individual. So keep raising that one, and if everybody else can raise that at any opportunity, the more we have that joined up messaging, the better.
Yeah, just to add to that, I actually sit on the Scottish Government's Advisory Council for Economic Transformation, and that has been a big theme of discussion, particularly for the human capital subgroup, because it's not just about the the systems that we put together up to sort of graduation and postgrad. You really need to look at the workers who are already out in workplaces and in employers, and a lot of Scotland's economy is small and medium employers, and we need to make sure that there is an easy way for those employers and those individuals who are out there in their career, throughout their career, to easily access a way of updating their skills, and that could be, you know, as part of a workplace strategy, or it could be for an individual who feels they want to make a move and develop themselves to the next step. So it's something that we are actually really very much targeting as an argument. If we want to transform our economy, we have to get that exact point right.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands up. I've got a couple of minutes.
Okay. The great thing about Slido, people, in case you didn't know, you can upvote the questions, so the most relevant questions that get heard are the ones that are going to get asked to the panel. So, top one, is there enough government and industry investment in skills to make transition a success? How can this be changed? And Jim, what are the priority areas for offshore wind skills for the ESP?
Okay, I'll kick off. So, is there enough investment? I actually think there is enough investment. I just don't think it's flexible enough, and don't think it's used in the most appropriate way. I'd quite like to have a conversation with somebody in government around that, because it isn't necessarily the amount of money. It's how it can be used to support industry and individuals in the future. There's a lot of money out there, but it just doesn't allow that flexibility to support all the different client groups, if you like, that they are. The priorities for ESP, a number, I touched on some. We're speaking to developers and inward investors on a regular basis. So we work with SDI, as you know, Simon. We're working with Scottish Enterprise High. So we're working with a number of companies, large companies, inward investors, to see how we can support them getting their skills base in place. And that's very reactive-ish, but they're coming at an early stage where we can actually plan for these skills, and we can work with the colleges, the universities, the private providers to ensure that the appropriate interventions are in place. A lot of our work is informed by policy, so we, as I say, we work with Scottish Government, so the transport side, the energy efficiency side, the offshore wind. Offshore wind, it's across the whole supply chain. I touched on 4 of our training networks that we have. So the offshore wind is focused mainly on O&M. We have a marine and maritime that's looking at the boat transfer and shipping skills. We have the hydrogen one that we see as being very pertinent to this, as we use renewable energy to produce hydrogen. We have the advanced manufacturing training network, because a lot of the supply chain companies, the Scottish companies who are looking to secure work in this area, are in that space. So we think we've got it right, but we're engaged at a very good level with Team Scotland. I think is a key strength, where if there's an anomaly that comes out, but then we can work with a company to look at suitable interventions. We're talking to a cable manufacturer at the moment that we never thought we would be speaking to, and that just happened in the past couple of weeks. So, but we're looking at how we can get them a whole workforce in a quick time frame. A model that's really good actually at the moment is the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park, where it's taken the Michelin site, looking to reinvigorate that. It has a skills academy at the heart of that. So I'm working with MSIP and Dundee and Angus College on that. It's really good because you've got industry working with the companies as they're looking to locate to the park. We have the universities and the college working together, so it's Dundee and Angus College, it's the University of Dundee, Aberdeen University and University of St Andrews, all pulling together to get that offer. But we've also got the public sector agencies in there. We've got Skills Development Scotland, we've got Scottish Enterprise as appropriate enterprise agency around the table, looking at how we can support any of these companies coming onto the park. So there are models there. They're different depending on the company, the industry, etc. But I'm quite confident we can flex enough to support pretty much every company that there is.
I'm getting the instructions here to round up, I'm afraid. But just before I do, can I just quickly ask you both, in terms of confidence levels around our ability to create this blueprint for this just transition, relative to where we were maybe a decade ago, and given the numbers that were quoted and where we are now, but going forward, just your thoughts on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you think your confidence level is about getting this right?
I'm an optimist as well, and despite, I talked about, I think we've got some hard lessons to learn, but I think if we can be open to that learning and maybe think out the box, I do think that we have a really good opportunity here in Scotland. I think Scotland offers a sense of scale that can really bring all the parties together, and I think that we are facing challenging times in terms of, how much money is available out there, and governments won't have the amount of money it takes to do it alone. We will need business to come in, but and encourage industry and business to invest more in skills and learning. But I think if we can get that mixture right and make sure that the voice of workers is also at those tables and in those rooms, then I think we've got an excellent opportunity going forward.
I think there's an absolute willingness and desire to make this happen and to make it work. But I do think it needs a bit of time and effort and a bit of funding. But funding's not the main thing. But government commitment and listening, I think, is the key thing. And developing that blueprint, developing real actions to take this forward is the key thing for me. Not just talk about it, let's do something about it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both very much. I think we're able to let you go now, but before you do, if you could all show thanks in the usual way.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the second section of this morning. I would now like to invite Lloyd Duffy to come up, and Lloyd is the responsible for Seaway 7's Renewable EPCI and Integrated Projects Division. So welcome, Lloyd. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey, and good afternoon, everyone. I think it's just past 12 now. So as Audrey says, my name's Lloyd Duthie. I'm Managing Director for Seaway 7's Integrated Projects and EPCI division based here in Scotland, in Aberdeen. Before I get into our transition, let me tell you a little bit about Seaway 7 and who we are. So Seaway 7 is a pure play renewables business, and we are focused on the fixed wind offshore business. Our first day of trading was actually just a month ago, on the 1st of October 21. Although we are a relatively new business in our own right, our parentage goes back some time, and it's that transition I'll talk about today. Our company is owned by Subsea 7, who owns 72%, and OHT 28%. My own history is with Subsea 7. I've been over 20 years with the business, and as I said, that's the transition piece that I'll go through here. As a business, the combination of these two companies has led us to have what we believe is a market-leading combination of assets and capabilities, and the track record we've developed over the last 10 years, I think, is unenviable. Our services, we cover now the wind turbine installation, foundations, the inner array grid cables that connect each of the turbines together. We install the offshore substations that are required, and we also have a heavy transport solution that provides us the ability to transport the equipment to whichever global location. If we look at the assets, we are a vessel-based business. We have 3 cable-lay vessels. The Seaway Aimery and the Seaway Moxie were our first 2 vessels brought in for cables. They were designed and built specifically for the offshore renewables business, and they are state-of-the-art and at the top end of their class. The Seaway Phoenix, however, is another part of that transition story. She was an oil and gas vessel used for deep water umbilical lay operations. Last year, we invested in a conversion to take her from an umbilical lay vessel to a cable lay and mirror the capabilities of the Aimery. We didn't just do that with the vessel, we had to do the same with the cruise as well. And we did that through sharing the cruise experience into the Aimery until the Phoenix became operational earlier this year. On the heavy lift side, we have 3 heavy lift vessels. We've got the Seaway Strashnov, a 5,000-ton heavy lift, state-of-the-art vessel. We've got her sister ship, the Seaway Udin, capable of lifting 2,500 tons. And our new build is the Seaway Alpha Lift. That's due for delivery next year. Again, like the Aimery and the Moxie, designed and built specifically for the offshore renewables business. In 2023, we'll take delivery of our new build jackup, the Vind 1, for the turbine installation market. Supporting all of these operations, we have 5 heavy transport vessels. And as you'll see later, we have a global operation, and we require to move equipment from location to location to deliver. I think this is a great schematic. It illustrates how we use our vessels and where. From the Vind 1, you can see here on the left, with a high reach crane for the turbine installation, to the Seaway Strashnov, capable of lifting up to 5,000-ton offshore substations. The Udin, not as capable, but good purpose for the monopile market. And then the Alpha Lift, you can see here, with our bespoke, automated production line for bringing the monopiles to the lifting station and installation in a safe and controlled manner. So what has been our transition? So for transition, I hear people talking about the last couple of years. For Subsea 7 and Seaway 7, this started more than 12 years ago. In 2008, we started to look to see how we could diversify our business. In 2009, we decided to create our offshore renewables business unit based in Aberdeen, looking at the UK market. It also coincided with Seaway Heavy Lift winning their first offshore renewables project for the installation of a substation and monopile foundations. Seaway Heavy Lift at the time were owned 50% by Subsea 7, so they were an active participant in our thinking at the time. The renewables business unit continued to look at various concepts, collaborating with various clients, in particular SSE, to develop the Beatrice wind farm. And that culminated in 2016 with the award from SSE of the Beatrice wind farm project to Subsea 7. That was an EPCI project. Let me tell you what EPCI is. That's the engineering, procurement, construction and installation of the foundations and cables that connect each of the turbines together. It was a huge contract for us, over £1 billion, but represented a major step in our transition towards a more renewables-based company. And it allowed us to have a platform to grow and invest in the renewables business. And in 2017, we acquired the other 50% of Seaway Heavy Lift to bring it into the company and start to grow and have full assets under our control within the renewables business unit. And then in 2018, we acquired what was then CM Offshore Cables to provide us a cable installation service. So we now had an engineering service, a project management service, heavy lift and cables to provide our clients with the solutions that they were looking for at the time. And we carried that business on over the coming years. And in 2020, last year, we were again awarded the Seagreen project for a similar scale project to Beatrice, but as was mentioned earlier, now a larger scale. And so over that 12 years period, we've gone from a business that was 100% oil and gas to a business that for Seaway 7 is now 100% renewables. For the wider Subsea 7 group, it represents between 25 and 30% of the business. So what do? We employ over 1,000 people now, with 600 people onshore and 400 people offshore. Almost all of our employees came from the oil and gas business. We've been involved in over 30 renewable projects worldwide. We've installed over 800 foundations, 1,100 cables, and in doing so, been involved in delivering 8 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity. We support all the main clients in the renewables industry, and our business is global. We've got a key European base, where most of the offshore wind is right now, but we also branched out, opened an office in Taiwan, and we're successfully executing projects there at the moment. And last year we opened a base in the US in prospect of progressing and developing a US business in the future. Let me talk a little bit about our offshore wind experience in Scotland, though. So back in 2017, we also supported the installation of the first floating offshore wind project in the world and in Scotland with a Hywind Scotland project. We were involved and responsible for the installation of the export cables using our oil and gas assets because of the deeper water and the capabilities and technologies that were required there, and expertise, I have to say. Beatrice, I've mentioned, 2018 we completed the Beatrice project, 2 years after award. A fantastic achievement. Beatrice at the time was the largest offshore wind farm in the UK. It was 588 megawatts in capacity, capable of delivering power to 450,000 homes. 84 turbines and 91 cables. Seagreen is a step up. It's double everything. It's double the capacity, nearly double the turbines, double the length of cables. But what's important between Beatrice and Seagreen has been for renewables to progress and offshore wind to progress, we've had to deliver cost savings to ensure that sustainability. Beatrice and Seagreen are the same contract values but double the capacity. We look at our Scottish base within Seaway 7 and Subsea 7, we've got over 1,500 people working for us in the UK and Scotland. Our main office is in Aberdeen, where we've got over 1,100 people there. In Glasgow, 350, and then we've got support at our other sites in Wick, Edinburgh and Orkney. These offices supported us in delivering Beatrice, and will and do support us in delivering Seagreen at the moment. If I take one example at Wick, Wick is our offshore pipeline bundle site. They know nothing about renewables, but they were invaluable for the Beatrice project with their local knowledge, their logistics, their marine support, and helping us deliver the offshore execution of that project. It's not just about the heavy lift vessels sitting out on site. They need a support team around them. In Glasgow here, we've got a welding and technology development centre that specialises in oil and gas pipeline welding. That welding technology we brought to the foundation design and welding such that we could optimise it and deliver repeatable results. Again, another key part. So all the wider teams within the organisation all support our renewables projects. Focusing now more on our renewables team in Aberdeen, where we centre our EPCI projects for the fixed wind. A few years ago, in 2015, when we kicked off Beatrice, we were a team of less than 15. Beatrice was largely executed from our Dutch and German offices, because that's where the expertise sat back then. Now, today, with Seagreen, we're sitting with a core team of over 100, and we tap in to the other 1,000 people within the organisation for the technical skills. The technical skills that we need or we use in oil and gas are equally applicable to the renewable sector. How to manage and deliver a large-scale complex project in oil and gas is the same qualities and skills you need to deliver a large-scale complex project in renewables. Welding engineers are welding engineers. Things are slightly different, but by and large the technical transfer is the same. We have coatings, corrosion, all of these technical capabilities are transferable, and we've used that. Not only that, we've tapped into the oil and gas quality and HSE professionals to ensure that we deliver a safe and quality product at the end of the day. I think it's also at this point it's worth talking about how Seaway 7 is organised. Seaway 7 has 4 divisions. There's got the heavy lift division, which was originated out of the Netherlands office. There's the cable division out of Germany. There's the turbine division that we've newly formed for the Vind 1, and I look after the 4th division, which is the EPCI and integrated. That's the bit that my division brings all the other 3 elements together to deliver our needs to our clients where they want more than one thing. And what we've also started to do now in Aberdeen is tap into that oil and gas resource and develop satellite teams for both our heavy lift and cables teams. That transferability of moving the competence of project and heavy lift engineering from oil and gas into renewables with the support of our colleagues in the Netherlands and Germany has been invaluable in growing the company, and we will continue to grow that in the years ahead. But we also have an impact on our supply chain. So managing these projects from our Aberdeen office, our go-to is our local supply chain. That's the first place we want to go to. We've got a well-established database with over 1,300 businesses from the oil and gas that we go to support our renewables business as well. And we encourage and want to give all these opportunities to the local companies. Beatrice and Seagreen has seen us introduce Scottish companies to the renewables business. We have had to support them. We've had to coach them, make sure they understand what is exactly required so that they can, one, give us an offer, but also be able to successfully transition. Some good examples, Global Energy. We work very closely with them, and Global, I think it's fair to say, have been a key partner of Subsea 7's for the last 10 years in oil and gas. And we work with them on Beatrice so that they developed a capability to also go off and support our commissioning operations on Beatrice. And it was a huge success. Fathom Systems in Aberdeen area, we provided the electrical distribution equipment for the foundations. And in Found Ocean, we had the grouting system for the foundations. And here's just a quick example of some of the other businesses we used on Beatrice, and we'll be also following up on Seagreen. So for every one role almost we provide in Aberdeen, there's a network that goes beyond that we're trying to encourage the Scottish supply chain into it. So our participation in the energy transition, it doesn't end there. You know, we want to capture the opportunities in this high growth business. We want to leverage the existing skill sets from the oil and gas and apply it to renewables. And we also want to use our global reach and risk management to deliver these large, complex projects. And we will differentiate ourselves locally here through a reliable EPCI offering. And hopefully we will create a sustainable value for all of our stakeholders. In terms of the future, I think there's great local opportunities for us all through existing projects, Seagreen that we're executing at the moment, ScotWind. You know, we're all waiting for January to see what happens, but I think that's really exciting to see what will happen there, and the wider transition. Floating wind, the oil and gas market is well suited to the challenges there with our logistics, deeper water and marine operations. And we have an opportunity to grow our renewables team and export our know-how as the industry expands globally. And our energy transition within the business doesn't stop there. Our pipeline experience is well suited to the hydrogen market and the carbon capture market. We are also supporting Simply Blue in the development of the Salamander field, where we're looking to combine our expertise with floating wind and hydrogen production and develop an all-round solution for that. And finally, we're also supporting our oil and gas clients and looking to see how they can decarbonise their operations through electrification, including power to shore, but also floating wind for their applications as well. So with that, I'll thank you for your time.
Great, thank you very much, Lloyd. I think just your journey over the last decade or just over the last decade is really, really encouraging, and I think gives us a lot of optimism in terms of the broader supply chain. If I can now invite Paul Cooley, Director of Capital Projects at SSE Renewables. There you are, Paul. I couldn't see you. Good to see you. And yeah, we'll hopefully squeeze in time for Q&A afterwards. But Paul, I appreciate you've got a 1 o'clock dead stop. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Audrey, and thanks for Scottish Enterprise for asking us along. Yeah, I guess I'll start with a little bit around SSE Renewables for those of you that don't know us, and for those of you that are welcome, or visitors to Glasgow, welcome, and at this particularly important time. And yes, the weather is always as good as this in Scotland. So I head up our capital projects group at SSE Renewables, which is essentially developing and building all our onshore and offshore hydro and storage projects. But I'm here today to talk about offshore wind. And at SSE, we've been involved in offshore wind for about 15 years now. It's been through a number of stop-starts in the UK, but really looking forward, it's a core business for us, and we've really gone through a transition from a primarily hydro and onshore business to one that's increasingly focused in offshore wind, both in the UK, Scotland and beyond. We've been involved right back from the early days of Greater Gabbard, which at a heady 500 megawatts was the largest, I think the largest renewables project in the world, certainly the largest offshore wind farm in the world, through to Beatrice, which I'll speak about today, Seagreen that you've heard about from Lloyd, and Dogger Bank, which is currently just going into construction, which again, at a significantly larger 3.6 gigawatts will be the largest offshore wind farm in the world when it's completed in 2026. We're not stopping there though. We've got a number of development projects, most notably Berwick Bank, which you heard a little about earlier, which is over 4,000 megawatts of offshore wind opportunity. So as you can imagine, with that kind of an investment pipeline, that leads to some huge figures, and I'll not dwell on them, but right now we're delivering about 9 billion of capital investment in offshore wind across those projects I talked about. Importantly, 3 billion of that is in projects in Scotland. We've got over 3,500 jobs, people working on our projects right now, and that's across a range of activities. Everything from people out in the field securing land and working with stakeholders, through to our development team of around 700 people that are currently primarily based just down the street here in Waterloo Street in Glasgow, and many more, many thousands during the construction phase, many involved in businesses in this room. But we're not stopping there. We're targeting around 1 gigawatt of additional build every year from 2025. And as part of that, clearly, particularly in offshore wind, partnerships and collaboration are absolutely central to being successful in this business. And that's partnerships all the way through the investment life cycle and ultimately the asset life cycle. So everything from partnering with key stakeholders during the development phase, partnering with the supply chain during the delivery phase, but in particular, and something I'm going to focus on here, partnering with local communities during the operational phase. We're also working with some colleagues from Marubeni Corporation and Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners in our bid for ScotWind. And the reason I mention that is that if we look forward in Scotland, floating wind is a critical part of the opportunity in the supply chain. And both our partners there have a long and deep history and capability in floating offshore wind. So that's, yeah, and you'll hear a lot about it, I'm sure, already and over the next few days, that really floating wind is the next big horizon for us. But we've got a lot to be getting on with now, and we've got a lot of successes to look back on. So with that in mind, I'll maybe say a few things about Beatrice before I get into the story about Wick, which is really what I'm here to talk about. Like most offshore wind farms, Beatrice is a joint venture. SSE Renewables developed, built and now operate the project, but we do that in partnership with Red Rock Power. You'll probably be familiar with a developer based out of Edinburgh, and then two green energy funds, Equitix and Trig. So it's very much a joint operating model. The project, when it was built completed back in 2019, was 84 turbines at a huge 7 megawatts. Interestingly, right now we're contracting 14 megawatt projects for Dogger Bank. They're currently in manufacture. I'm planning for something between 18 and 20 megawatt projects on Berwick Bank. So every time we look, the turbines get bigger, and that's one of the big challenges actually in the industry, is that trying to keep up with the development of the technology is a real challenge for the supply chain, and for developers, and for stakeholders, because every time we consent a project, we got to look at it again because the next turbine's even bigger. What all of that means, though, is it drives down the cost of energy, and that's in what is a fiercely competitive market, particularly with the CFD structures, it's all about driving down those levelised cost of energy. Scotland has some challenges on Beatrice and similarly on Seagreen. The water is very deep here, so we have a great wind resource, but we're talking about 200 feet water depths where we're putting these foundations. So that drives up costs, it drives up installation challenges, but it also very much limits the supply chain options for that kind of technology, because there are very few places in the world can manufacture that kind of kit. But we got there on Beatrice. The capex ended up 2.5 million, of which 500 million has gone into the Scottish economy. And another kind of stat that's important for us to hold on to is that that capital spend in Scotland is only half the story. Around half of the value add for an offshore wind investment is during the operational phase, and it's often forgotten about. But when you think of these are 30, 35, some people are modelling them at 40 years, these assets, and they will get repowered. The windy places aren't going away. So the long-term opportunity is massive, and as I say, sometimes forgotten about when we're all talking about big capital figures. So with that in mind, I'll bring it from the global to the very, very local, and take you to Wick. And those of you that aren't from Scotland, to get to Wick, you essentially drive north in Scotland until you run out of Scotland, and that's where Wick is. It's about as remote a community as you can possibly get. I should say mainland Scotland. We'll not forget our island friends. But essentially, it's a very small fishing village right up in the northeast of the country, and that's our operational base, now completed. But it wasn't always like that. In fact, Wick wasn't always like that. And if we look back to the history of Wick, actually it goes back, and in the maritime history goes back many hundreds of years. But in the late 1800s, it was actually one of Europe's largest herring fishing ports. What you can't see in that lovely black and white photograph is the sea of red sails on the herring vessels on the right-hand side. So over 1,000 herring vessels operated out of Wick. That was a massive income for the area and a big employer. The building that we eventually took over, you can kind of see there, highlighted in yellow. That also has a long heritage. I would say at the time of that photograph, it was probably used for curing herring. So obviously what you can't get also is the smell that I'm sure was present at that time. But later it was used as a cooper's yard, and then during the Second World War it was actually used to billet troops for the British Army during the war. But unfortunately after the war it fell into pretty bad disuse, and by the time we looked at the site back in 2016, it was a pretty sorry sight, and what that photograph doesn't actually show is just how bad it was inside. So it essentially had become a bit of a derelict, bird-infested eyesore on the harbour site, on what is otherwise a very pretty fishing harbour. So we could have made the decision to build a new state-of-the-art facility. The Wick Harbour Authority worked really closely with us and worked very well with us and gave us some options, but we thought, well, both it would have been a huge opportunity lost, if we didn't take the opportunity to essentially transform this derelict building into something that would be an operational base for the next 30 years. So we made that decision, and £20 million later, we have a state-of-the-art facility, but that also isn't very much in keeping with the heritage of the harbour. The inside of the building was certainly not pretty. What you can't see there is the many skip loads of pigeon excrement that had to be removed from the building knee deep in some places. So that was a pretty big exercise before we could even see what we were working with. But essentially, the building was in pretty poor state. So we got to it working closely with the Highland Council Heritage team, and we're able to painstakingly essentially deconstruct a lot of the building, take it away, store it, renovate it, and bring it back and essentially reconstruct it, both to visually look like it was pristine and brand new, but also fit it out internally with state-of-the-art operational plant facilities for 90 staff, and all the telecoms and technical capabilities that operating a £2 billion project needs. So that was a huge amount of work during 2017. We also kept it local, and it couldn't get much more local than GMR Henderson, our civil contractor that did the work for us in the building. They are literally around the corner on the harbour, so they're able to walk to work. But more importantly, they're also able to take on some apprentices off the back of the contract with us. So there's a few more young people staying local instead of having to move away. As well as renovating the building, we also used the facility. We have to get out to the turbines, so we located our crew transfer vessels at the harbour, and we actually took over, worked with Wick Harbour Authority to take a piece of pretty run-down harbour side and completely renovate it, put in new pontoons so that we could operate our vessels from that location. Again, another big civil engineering challenge. There was old slipways that were 100 years old, and piles that were driven into the harbour bed that were really difficult to remove. But we worked through that, and essentially that's what we've got today. Essentially a state-of-the-art building that's in keeping with the heritage of the area. Right now we've got around 90 staff that operate from the location. Some of them SSE, some of them Siemens staff, the turbine supplier. Of that, around 2/3 are local. So that's 60, 70 people that otherwise would have had to move away from their community, take their families with them. So they're in the area, spending their money in the area. And again, an often forgotten statistic, but for these kind of locations, for remote communities, every job is worth the equivalent of 3 or 4, maybe 5 jobs in a city, because all of that income is spent locally. It's very concentrated. And then the knock-on jobs, everything from the local chip shop to the local hotel in the town, and rental facilities, rental properties, all benefit from it. So the concentration of benefit is much greater than you would have, in a larger town or city. We also have 9 apprentices between ourselves and Siemens that are just coming up for qualification now. And again, I think around 7 of those are local kids that again have a career now where they otherwise would have had limited opportunities. And 8 out of 9 of the operators that actually operate the control room are from the oil and gas sector. So we're seeing very transferable skills from oil and gas across. So look, that's 90 people, 60 local people. Doesn't sound like a lot, but this is one project. Looking forward for Scotland, there are dozens of projects, dozens of opportunities to do the same thing and transform those local communities. So we've taken this to essentially a modern, as I say, state-of-the-art harbour facility. What we've also seen, and this is anecdotal, but certainly from my visits to the site, is that there's more pleasure craft, there's more activity in the harbour and more visitors, because it's just a nicer place to be. So the knock-on effects, again, that we didn't foresee are substantial for the local people. And I would also have to call out to the local Wick community. As I say, the Harbour Authority and the Highlands Council were all super supportive, really, really good, huge collaboration and a lot of support for us. So it didn't just end there. We've also put in place a £6 million community fund. We were able to support everything from the local football team to local festivals and so on. But also importantly and coincidentally but timely, a lot of that funds went into supporting the community during the COVID pandemic. So it was really, really good to be playing our part for the local community in that regard. So the path ahead, and you've heard some of this, we don't want to stop at Beatrice by any means. We've got our Seagreen, Berwick Bank and ScotWind projects to look ahead to. The Seagreen in particular is in construction right now, and not as pretty a building, but our operational facility at Montrose is just being completed there, and there is a reason for that. Montrose is a modern harbour facility, so that building's actually much more in keeping. So we're going to operate, again, a very similar number of people over a very similar time frame out of Montrose. And again, Montrose have been great. They've been really, really good, really supportive. So yeah, as Lloyd said, there's hundreds of jobs right now being supported in Scotland off the back of the Seagreen project, about £1 billion into the Scottish economy. And again, it's the world's deepest fixed bottom offshore wind farm. So we like to do things difficultly in Scotland. It's always deeper, far away. Berwick Bank is next. Again, 4 gigawatts, massive supply chain opportunities there. We're working with a number of supply chain partners already, even though the project's it's just about to go into the consenting process. But we would really like to see manufacturing facilities supported off the back of Berwick Bank. And already on Dogger Bank, we're working with Global Energy and a number of other people to see if we can get some, investments in facilities that are appropriate for Scotland and that are in the manufacturing supply chain. So highly automated, but very important investments in new manufacturing, which hopefully we'll be able to announce in the next few weeks. So in terms of scale, I would definitely labour the point that scale is important for Scotland and supply chain. Projects like what we've seen in Dogger Bank is that we were able to trigger investments in Teesside and blade facilities, as I say, hopefully in Scotland, and tower facilities, and lots of other tier 2 and tier 3 investments in the supply chain, both during construction and operation. It's really important that for Scotland that we get as many projects as possible and build up that pipeline, both through the planning process and through the CFD process, so we can use that leverage to really drive the benefits, and particularly the local benefits. And leaving you with ScotWind, again, this isn't just about SSE. There's a lot of people interested in building out in ScotWind. It's a massive opportunity. We think there's around 15 billion of economic benefits of the various projects that are being proposed. 10 gigawatts of offshore wind is definitely achievable, even without Scotland, or just about without Scotland. And through our collaboration with Marubeni and CIP, we've already announced £100 million direct supply chain investment fund that we really want to just put into Scottish projects to give that kickstart. And one of the things we've learned over the past number of years, both investing directly in manufacturing supply chain facilities, but also just being in this business for quite a while, is that those, versus the size of the industry, 100 million doesn't sound like enough, or sound like a lot, but actually, 10 or 20 million in an investment in a new facility can be the difference between it working and not working. So these kind of funds do punch above their weight. So I'll leave you with that. I think the things I'll probably ask you to think about is that the supply chain and the benefits from the offshore wind industry as Scotland moves towards net zero, they're throughout the entire life cycle of projects, right from development. As I say, we have very highly paid and highly skilled people working in our Glasgow and Perth offices, through the construction phase with many of the people you've heard from today, but also through the operations phase. And we shouldn't forget that the transformational impact on some of the local communities, from just placing hundreds of operational jobs and the knock-on effects on those supporting jobs in local harbour communities are really, really important. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. I really appreciate that. Lloyd, if you'd like to join me up here, and we'll take some questions. And I think we might be able to stretch this out to 1:05, if that's okay. Great. Thank you. So that really was fascinating insight from both organisations. So have we got any questions from the floor or via Slido through the app? Gentleman over there, yes, thank you. Would you like to come up to one of the standing mics, please?
everybody. Right, we've got a Tier 1 in the room, so Lloyd, I'm going to unfortunately put this one to you. Even more rare, a Scottish Tier 1. You know, I think looking at Seagreen, interesting you talked about it there, you know, Scottish contractor in Scottish waters for a Scottish customer. You know, I'm sure it's pretty frustrating like it is for me that we go to Asia and the rest of Europe to pick up cables, foundations, etc. So I think SOEC report recently had a recommendation that probably Scotland has enough to house maybe 4 to 6 additional factories, cables, foundations being a prime case of this. Given also Scotland will be asking for some commitments on Scottish content, I think as a Tier 1, how supportive are you of not going to Asia and sort of picking this stuff up in Scotland? And what needs to happen in Scotland for this to be credible? Is it a case of just building this capacity, or is there certain quality, cost and delivery targets that the supply chain needs to meet that it's not currently meeting? Thank you.
I think there's a few questions in there. The question around, you know, our commitment, like I've said in my presentation, our first go-to is our local companies, our local supply chain, and we do follow a fairly robust procurement process to give them the best opportunity. We probably go out of our way to coach the local companies to be able to provide, one, they understand exactly what the scope is, and also to give them the best opportunity, give us the best offer. In terms of what we do going forward, we work being a Tier 1 contractor, we work very collaboratively with our clients in understanding how to best develop and deliver a project. I think it's fair to say none of us want to go any further than we need to go. It's definitely the case. But as Paul said, you know, we also have a commitment or a need to drive down that cost as well. You know, I think that's part and parcel. Anything to add, Paul?
I would absolutely agree. Look, it's really, really tough. It's a brutally competitive market, renewables. In comparison to oil and gas, it's just a different world. So there's two things. You have a competitive process, and bear in mind, Seagreen was the only Scottish project to win a contract in the last CFD auction, and we only won it for 40% of the capacity. The rest of it's all merchant, which is a big challenge in itself. So you've got Scottish projects that are in deeper water, that are more expensive, and there's also transmission charges that I'll not bore you with, but a lot of disadvantages, let's say. So that squeezes the opportunity. But that sounds like an excuse. The reality is that when we speak to the supply chain, they need volume and they need serial production to be able to compete. And that's really the answer. We need a large volume of Scottish projects. A lot of the work that SOEC is doing, and we're heavily involved in that, you know, is trying to identify that block of projects. So while we're all competing against each other in the industry, there's also an opportunity to collaborate, and it's not straightforward, but it's doable, to create that volume of orders that'll then trigger an investment by a cable manufacturer or a supply chain or a OEM to actually invest in a new facility, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about kind of trying to trigger new facilities for Scotland to feed the big Scottish offshore wind build. You've got to bring together in that. I think the work that SOEC is doing is great because it's bringing government, Tier 1s and developers together into the room to see how do we square this circle, because no one project or no one developer can generate a manufacturing supply chain. The world doesn't work like that. I think what we have seen though is that industry are up for it. The competitive reality is there, but I think if we pick the right, let's call it the right types of manufacturing that are suitable for a Scottish, for Scotland competing in a global market, I think it's doable. And we've, like on our Dogger Bank project, we just contracted 3 new operational vessels for an Aberdeen-based company, North Star. They were competitive. They won it on price and quality. So that's really, so it can be done, but you do need the scale of projects. So Dogger Bank's 3.5 gigawatts. You can do a lot with that, whereas a smaller project just has much more limited scope.
Just to add as well, we also get lost in who didn't get the work, but there are a lot of businesses have secured work both from Beatrice and Seagreen. And I said, I take a pride in being entrants for some of these businesses. I think it's an important bit. We shouldn't get lost. And just to echo what Paul said, that continuity, the pipeline, is really important. We suffer as much as the supply chain. We had a gap between Beatrice and Seagreen that was, uncomfortable in terms of justifying an ongoing commitment to the local area in the business. But we did that. So that we have achieved a lot already. We're on a journey. It's not going to happen straight away.
Can I just ask a question in terms of Paul, you mentioned the right type of manufacturing, and I just wonder if you want both to expand on that, and particularly in the context of floating wind and that new opportunity that's coming our way. Would you maybe want to offer a few more words on that?
Yeah, well, I talked about serial production being important, so some of the things we're looking at, it's pretty early stage, but some of the things we're looking at is using, for instance, facilities that can manufacture turbine towers to also manufacture components that are used to form the structure of a floating foundation. So that's something that could be manufactured in a tower facility, bolted together on a yard in Scotland and floated out to site. So that's very, you're combining serial production with novel technology. So there are those kind of examples that certainly work. Cable manufacture is another classic example where it's a highly automated but still very skilled and technical manufacturing process that is very leverageable to Scotland. But the reality is that, where it's very large labour activities, like anything else, and like anything else in the UK or Scotland, it's really tough to compete with the Far East. That's just the reality.
I can't really add much to what Paul said. It is about ensuring we have that scale. I think floating wind does lend itself to a more local solution because of the scale and logistics challenges associated with that from a marine perspective. And we shouldn't lose sight of that marine operations element to it. So with every wind farm, there comes a huge logistics operation, whether it's tugs, barges, quayside support. And with floating wind, it's a scale up in what we're doing on offshore wind for sure, and fixed wind, sorry.
Jeremy.
Right, just to follow up on that from what Paul just said, I think we mustn't forget, likewise in Scotland, we've got the Scottish Government have just gone out on their onshore wind ambitions. When we look at the supply chain and attracting manufacturers, cable manufacturers, etc. to Scotland, we've actually got 20 gigawatts to talk about, not just 10. So I think we need to make sure that the two coordinate each other's activities to make sure that we can grab as much action as possible. But then my next question was to follow on a little bit from on the floating, because I suppose the fixed bottom wind market is a quite mature market now. I know we're stretching the boundaries in Scotland in terms of our foundations and our depth, but at the end of the day, we've sort of missed that opportunity to get that environment in the fixed bottom world. Maybe in East Anglia a little bit more of that, but how do we grab that environment? How do we make sure the engineering design? How do we make sure, as you've talked about, the innovation of making tower sections that turn into foundations and keep the whole thing as far as we can Scottish? How can we try to make that the best possible journey? And how do we work with government to make sure we demonstrate that we have the cheapest manufacturing processes, the most competitive solutions in Scotland, in time for when we need to deploy them in anger? So obviously CFD is an important first stage, but how do we make sure we learn? Effectively in floating, we're going back to about 2005, 2006 in the fixed bottom market, where we're actually even talking about how do we marry a turbine with a foundation, and who warrants it, and how do we warrant it, and all those sorts of different things we went through at that time. So if we can lead the way in that here now, then we can perhaps get more out of it this time round, because we were slightly slower with the fixed bottom market than down south was. So it's really how do we work together as a sector to deliver that environment, to deliver that value and the design stuff that goes with the physical deployment.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think it comes back to that collaborative approach that we've been talking about. So maybe share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot of the right things already. You know, ORE Catapult, the floating centres of excellence. I think we are, and certainly driving the knowledge agenda. The advantage we have in floating actually is that everyone else is behind the curve as we are in some respects. So you think about it, you know, in terms of fixed bottom and certainly in onshore, countries like Denmark really led the way when the UK really weren't at the races. So it's very hard to recover from that. Whereas in floating, I think we're doing the right things by way of getting the technology excellence based here, the design based here, and then we should ensure that the manufacturing flows on from that. But you're right, you know, even in terms of how to install a turbine on a floating foundation offshore, there's an awful lot to be done there to develop that. You know, I think we've got the right skills though here.
I think I would add that the clusters and SOEC are really important in bringing developers and the supply chain together. You know, we're part of the deep wind cluster on SOEC. We support that, and I think that's a great forum to allow us to understand how best to deliver that value. And it is that early engagement, because the design that you choose will influence in many ways what you can maximise locally through the supply chain, and that early engagement through the clusters. If there was one thing I would say, it would be better if it was all just one place. Multiple places I struggle with. So I know there's a Forth and Tay, and there's Deep Wind, and there's SOEC, to name but three, and there are more. There's an Aberdeen one, there is probably other ones I don't even know about. So a bit of rationalisation of them to have a more focused effort in the government support of these would, I think, help.
Thank you. I think we may have time for just one more quick question, or possibly not, but a tiny quick question. Anything that's come through strongly, Simon, on this slide, or that we haven't picked up?
Yeah, an interesting one on Slido. What are Seaway 7 doing, not just to green its business, but to transition its fleet to zero emissions? Paul?
It's a good question. The fleet, our vessels, are our biggest challenge. I think they're the whole marine industry's biggest challenge. We've got teams looking at that at the moment. So our new build vessel, the Alpha Lift, it will come as ready as it can be with current technology. So the engines will be ready for hybridization, for alternative biofuels and other technologies. For our existing fleet, we're looking at power to shore. So when she comes alongside, we switch everything off and we power to shore. But there is no one quick answer to, dealing with the marine kind of engines that we have at the moment. It will take time, but we are certainly at the front edge of developing that at the moment with our new build teams.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much. I think I do have to wrap up now, if not I will be in trouble. I just want to say thank you. I want to thank all our speakers from this morning and afternoon session in terms of sharing their experience to date. And I think we all acknowledge the scale of the opportunity that we have here, but we really are into this sort of need now for action as opposed to the talk, and I think that theme's coming through. And I think that action, we really do need to progress quickly to ensure that we do create that blueprint for a just transition. I think what we've seen though today is that there definitely is appetite. And I think we've witnessed in terms of the various structures that are in place to support entry into the industry, growth within the industry, whether that be the people or the businesses, and indeed the international opportunities on the back of it. But talking of appetite, it is lunchtime, a wee bit late for lunch, but if I can ask you the lunch is on that side there, I think at the back as well, so split yourselves between the tables there. The next session will begin at 2 o'clock, so for those of you that are waiting on, please do try and stick to that 2 o'clock start time. I'm not sure if there's anything else housekeeping-wise I need to know. That's fine, I've covered that all. But can we please thank again all of our speakers for this session. Thanks very much.